Okay, so we're going to continue with chapter 3, titled Joyful Participation in the Sorrows of Life, from the book Being While Knowing That You're Not. And we continue December 2nd, 2003. One morning last week, I was racing down the ice-covered mountain roads, trying to get my dying kitty to the vet, as he didn't even have the strength to lift his head out of his own vomit. This was not his first visit to the vets that week, and I had been sitting with this intense pain for many days at this point. Reality was such that week that I had also ran over several small critters and one big deer. So the theme of reality for this month had been death, death, and more death for cute little blameless creatures that wanted nothing except to simply cross the road, or in my kitty's case, not even that. So, you know that I've written many times about my deep resonation with the notion of joyful participation in the sorrows of life. So, right in the thick of it, as I was staring at my dying kitty on the car floor, while still trying to navigate through the windy and crooked, icy mountain roads, I tried to look to see if I could find any joy, as I already was definitely participating in the sorrows of life. And you know what? There was a joy there. Not the joy in the conventional sense of euphoric bliss, but definitely a distinct stillness that was only accentuated by the contrast that the deep sadness offered. It was only at that moment that I realized just how naked and raw our experience of life is. There are absolutely no boundaries, no borders to separate us from the experience that we're having. When pain comes, it is so complete that there truly is only pain. But being complete with this pain spares us from something else that I distinguish as suffering. The difference being that suffering is completely thought dependent, whereas pain is direct and authentic. In other words, pain is not a byproduct of our thoughts and memories, but suffering is completely dependent upon thoughts and ultimately relegated to the realm of imagination. I should point out that after this happened, the pain was still there. Looking to see if this joy was there, and finding it did not make everything. All right, I'm sorry, I'm going to read that sentence over again. Looking to see if this joy was there, and finding it did not make everything go away magically, and I continued to cry out loud as I drove down the road, being complete with my direct experience of the pain. Something interesting did happen the same day, which is also worth mentioning. After I dropped him off at the vet's, I returned home and just lied in my bed with all of that pain. You may remember last year when I went through something similar with my daughter, and how all of that pain was transmuted into healing energy. Well, the same thing happened again, but this time I remember saying out loud, I think it was out loud, "Thank you," while I was in the depths of this pain. I can't remember exactly why I said thank you, but I remember that I was being shown something that revealed how all this comes together perfectly. And my dying kitty and the pain that it caused my family was absolutely perfect, as these events were much like impersonal waves that rise and fall while inexorably entwined with all the waves which by their very nature offer the opportunity and appearance for this, the complete picture. So once again, we come back to this. However, the taste of impermanence, still fresh on our taste buds, adds a particular dimension to this, or maybe just an appreciation that may have gone otherwise overlooked. And I wrote some notes down when I looked at this last night that this seems to be a microcosm for everything, for God, reality itself, how it's evolving, how everything is perfect, but it's continually changing or evolving. That's why I like the metaphor of a caterpillar. You have a perfect caterpillar, and then it goes through darkness, which is also perfect, but it's ignorance. It's that stage of the perfection. And then when it comes out, it's a butterfly, which is the same as the caterpillar, but evolved. So everything's the same, but different. It's always growing. Everything's perfect, but it's also growing. It's also changing. It's evolving. And that's what I'm saying. You have to go through the darkness to grow, to change, to evolve. So even the pain, even the darkness is part of the perfection. It's perfect if you look at it as a whole. All right. And then it also gets back to the it is and it isn't. That trends throughout everything I've noticed. 12.4.03 I write, since the word God simply refers to this or what is, you could already see the wisdom in surrendering your personal will for God's will, as anything less than that is simply resisting what actually is. This seems more like a practical and pragmatic approach to life than a moral stand or a pious position that we must agree with God's plan because he's the head honcho. Positions and stands are things of the head, but recognizing the fact that resisting reality is suffering is stuff of the heart. You don't need to do mental gymnastics to recognize that what is already, and whether or not you surrender to what is, or God's will, reality, in deference to your own personal will, it's the difference between heaven and hell. So I'm not saying that anyone should surrender because it's virtuous or anything like that. I'm just pointing to the practical fact that when your personal will is different than what actually is God's will, then you're courting endless suffering. It's just basic arithmetic. I think that it's important to emphasize that this should not be taken as a stand or a philosophical position, because if surrendering is treated as such, if surrendering is treated as a decision, then you will simply be thinking about surrendering rather than true surrendering itself. I see true surrendering as a mode of living rather than just something you do. Okay, so practically speaking, what am I implying here? Does this imply that you should not fight for a cause that you believe in? Well, only if you take surrendering to be a stand. Only if you take surrendering to be a moral or a pious act only if you take surrendering to be a moral or a pious act would you veto a natural and spontaneous impulse to fight for something. In true surrendering, you may find yourself fighting for a cause while remain as an open palm. I'll give you a concrete example so we don't get lost in philosophy. A long time ago, I truly surrendered to the universe. What I was feeling was such a complete love and trust for the universe that I only wanted to serve as a vehicle for the sake of all. I had such a love for reality that I wanted to give my life to the universe so that it could work through me, unfettered by my own personal agenda. Looking back, I see that as kind of silly, as I had no choice whether or not Mark was a tool or not, as Mark is by definition already a tool of the universe. But what's more important is that out of this genuine love and trust for reality, I unintentionally aligned my own will, agenda, with God's will, what is. So everything that would happen from that point on was viewed from the eyes of the most profound trust or surrendering. And since that time, obviously everything has not gone Mark's way. Many times after that gesture of surrendering, Mark had been confronted with realities that were not preferred, and some realities that flat out contradicted the way I thought I'd like things to be. Now, of course, when I met these unseemly realities, my first reaction was most likely to resist. But it would only be moments later that I remembered that I could genuinely trust the process of life and simply allowed for this distasteful reality, knowing full well that time is the culprit when it comes to things looking ugly. In other words, I didn't have to do a little dance in my head, somehow justifying the horrible reality. Instead, I could really see that life was a process, and this whole process happened through time, which meant that I'm not seeing everything all at once. And the reason for my dislike for that particular reality was more of a matter of an incomplete perspective. All that may seem like a dance, but it really does happen spontaneously and instantaneously with impulses and flashes and, rather than thoughts. And I made a little note there. I think what I was referring to was the complete seeing. That if you go through life with complete seeing, in other words, if you acknowledge that anything you don't like or anything that causes resistance, it's because of an incomplete perspective. You're seeing something that's not complete. You're not seeing everything all at once, and so it's jarring. It's uncomfortable for you. So anyway, I continued to live from that perspective with waxing and waning intensity, but it only grew deeper. That approach to life was equally or maybe even more important in my life as all the non-dual teachings combined. It was from that perspective from which I read and practiced those teachings, and it was that perspective that made me realize that these teachings were valid. They were seen as valid because they matched what was already my direct experience. Through time, this perspective became a way of living by default. And somewhere along the way, I saw that everything that I look at is literally and actually nothing other than God. And that any word that comes up anywhere is a word from God. Actually, the first way I saw that was that everything was a projection from me, the real me, big me, the self. Every sentence that appeared before me was brought to me by me. Any person that I interacted with was me. And everything that I see is me. So it was at that point, I don't know what that was. It was at that point that things did not go my way. I would instead react curiously. I wonder what this is all about. Time still weighed heavy as a factor, so I was just curious to see how the situation would unfold. Also, I should point out that what is fueling the surrendering is an intense love for reality. So it actually feels good to rest in this undesired situation because it simply feels good to give yourself up to reality or what is. I think that is the key. You gladly surrender because it really feels good to express unconditional love and a trust for reality, to be able to demonstrate that love and that trust. It feels good. What I found is that through time, reality turned out to be much better than I could have ever envisioned it with my own personal agenda. So this makes surrendering that much more easy and natural. Another thing that has made surrendering easy and natural is simply noticing that life is like a pendulum. It's always swinging from one direction to another. Culturally, individually, collectively, every way you could think of. From the commie scares of the 40s and 50s came the free living and indulgence of the 60s and 70s. From that was born the conservative 80s, back to the grunge 90s, so on and so forth. So even though Bush's policies and ideologies fly in the face of my own personal values, I trust that this is just one swing of the pendulum that is a natural process of life. I don't like Bush at all, but I wouldn't have it any other way because he is reality. And for me, to deny one aspect of reality is to live in ignorance. He is a natural functioning of reality, and it is only through time that his functioning will reveal itself to be perfect for everybody. To deny Bush would be as silly as denying death. And I just wrote a note to myself after that. That's interesting how this was 2003, almost 2004, how it foreshadowed the deep tribalism that's happening right now, how tame it was. I look back at 2000 and 2004 and to think how contentious it seemed. But the tribalism that's happening now, it's like it's reaching a critical mass. That dynamic of denying an aspect of reality to a part of the whole. That dynamic of tribalism is coming to a full head. All right, so I continue. Life is a whole, and to prefer only specific parts is just begging for suffering, as that is ignorance. Kind of like looking for dry water because you like how fluid it is, but just can't accept its wetness, denying parts of the whole. So now I find myself with an attitude of, we'll see what reality has in store. There are obviously different parts of the movie: development, conflict, resolution, etc., etc. You could isolate any part of the movie and point out how horrible it is, but as a whole, it is revealed that all the parts are necessary and vital for the other parts to exist in the first place. Those bigots that you refer to represent the bigot in myself. The murderers represent the murderer in me, etc. I forgive the bigot in myself, as I know that this bigotry occurs naturally from ignorance, and I am that loving space for all these transgressions that come and go spontaneously. Getting back to the movie analogy, I wrote this when I was taking notes, that I had no idea that I thought about that long ago, because this was a vital part of something that I was going through recently. The whole idea of a movie having all these different parts: the conflict, the resolution, the development of the characters, all these different things. So when I was going through the worst time of my life, that is how I felt, that it was okay, that it didn't feel like it should be any other way. There's a part of the movie where there's conflict. This is it. You're in it. Being at the amusement park, this is something I always tell my wife. It's like being at the amusement park. You're not always on the roller coaster. Sometimes you're just got off the roller coaster, and now you got to wait in line. You're at the back of the line. We're all on the roller coaster. We're all on at the amusement park at the same time. At the end of the day, we're all having the same experiences, relatively. But within it, throughout the time, you're seeing different stages of life. Oh, he's at the beginning of the line. He's at the end of the line. He's at the roller coaster right now. It's happening. Oh, he just got off. He's got forever to go to what happens again, whatever it is. But yeah, I think it gets back to just seeing that it's part of a whole, and that therefore whatever's happening in life, you just see that it's a necessary part and nothing's ever wrong. No matter what horrible thing you seem to go through, it is natural for the big picture, for what's coming next. All right, so I've talked about surrendering your life to reality. Well, true surrendering is not what you do or you don't do in life. What surrendering means to me is that you are there for it, life, completely and unconditionally. Sometimes it's painful and sometimes it's joyful, but it always has what is referred to by some mystics as one taste. And that is the taste of equanimity. It is my experience that this taste of equanimity comes directly from an unconditional surrender to reality as it already is. If you drop everything and become simple spaciousness, you will see that bigotry arises in the world naturally, and that you could live happily in a world where bigotry does exist simply because you could understand the bigot's position. It's a position of fear. Then I continue to 12.603. How can your reactions be anything other than what is? How could anything that is not be what is? That obviously doesn't make any sense on any level. I would say that your reactions are natural and spontaneous and should never be denied. Denying them doesn't make them go away anyway. What I advocate from my personal experience is to remain completely and unconditionally present with all your reactions, whether it be anger, sadness, or bewilderment. For me, that's where the rubber meets the road. Who cares about philosophy or ideas, blah, blah, blah? The reaction is a fact. That is direct and tangible. But you know what? Why should you even care about your reactions? They just happen spontaneously. And by assuming the seat of the witness, you can see that they're just happening, much like a volcano erupts naturally and effortlessly. No need to add a string of thoughts such as denial or acceptance to what is clearly presenting itself to you as pain. Personally, I don't like anger or frustration, so I do what I have found to be most conducive to a happy life, which is to just allow it to express itself and rest in it completely. So completely, in fact, that there are no boundaries between the you and the anger. Anger or other unpleasant feelings are also part of reality. So whenever anger comes, I just allow for it so thoroughly that in that moment of acceptance, there is only anger. The very act of being complete with reality, whether it be anger, sadness, or any other experience under the sun, always has the same flavor, and that is the one taste, the taste of equanimity. Going back to my example of my pet peeve, the pain is not caused by the politicians who wish to curtail our inherent liberties. Instead, I have found that the pain comes from my inability to understand that anybody could possibly think any other way than I do. Because of my limited perspective, pain arises naturally. At that point, I have two choices: making a stand on a self-righteous ideology of how things ought to be according to Mark, or drop my current perspective in deference to what actually is, and see from this spacious perspective that it's quite natural for them to behave as they do. Then I find myself feeling compassion for them, because it's obvious that they are reacting from fear, which is perfectly understandable, given the illusionary nature of the world and all, right? That's the thing, is people are deserving of our compassion. Understanding is the foundation of love. If you truly understand, or probably only if you truly understand, are you capable to love, because it's only from that understanding that you could love everybody, just because you're not looking at it as a part, but instead as a whole. I swear to you that I have found that the only difference between heaven and hell is simply attitude or perspective. I don't advocate compassion for pious reasons or for good karmic points. I have no use for morals, ethics, or good conduct. I advocate compassion for very selfish reasons. It feels good. I would much rather feel the feelings behind the words, "Oh, I'm sorry," than feel the feelings behind the words, "I'm right." That is immediate, and there's no need for philosophy to figure that out. A long time ago, I saw that life is like a river. People try and walk through the river themselves, and they get tired, frustrated, weary, because they're trying to do it themselves. They resist the natural current of the river, no matter what direction they walk in, because they have their own selfish ideas about how life should be. At some point, we grow so tired of resisting this natural current that maybe we collapse into the river, or maybe we even practice trying to surrender to the flow. But either way, at some point, we will find ourselves face down in the water. And it is at that point that you will see firsthand that the river does have a natural direction. And this direction is experienced as so perfect that there is no longer any resistance to its natural flow. You discover firsthand that you don't have to do anything because the river is doing everything itself already. Sure, you will get tossed into some rocks here and there, but that is also part of the natural flow of the river. And you could trust the pain because you trust the overall direction of the river. One last thing that I would like to point out is that yes, it is natural for people to act out of ignorance. And as you pointed out, it is natural that you react with resistance to their ignorance. But I have found that it is equally natural that you eventually feel drawn to learning from the pain that your resistance causes, which brings you to inquiry or some other type of investigation, an active investigation into the root of the pain. Then, after recognizing the source of the pain, it becomes natural that you no longer carry on with the mental gymnastics that is commonly associated with these unpleasant realities. Oops, sorry. So, I have found extreme tolerance, surrendering, to not be a pious matter or a decision based on a philosophy, but rather as a result of the natural process of life. It may be helpful in understanding my point by adding that I see life as a natural process where everything is just winding down naturally and perfectly. Even Mark is seen to be a psychological mechanism that is always in the process of winding down naturally. I don't have anything to do but just watch Mark unfold. 12:07:03, I continue. That is part of what I meant earlier when I said that all things are winding down and that the river has a direction that can be trusted. The way I envision this is like water running down naturally and chaotically. However, the way that it runs down is as if it were running through an invisible funnel. That narrowing effect of the funnel would be what scientists call clumping. I've gotten every indication from life that everything is naturally geared or slanted towards enlightenment. In other words, the natural laws of the universe are automatically driving everyone towards enlightenment. And this whole impersonal process is what I call the great winding down. I happen to live deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains in the Shenandoah Forest, and every day I walk my kitties through our property down to the Piney River that sits at the bottom of our property. During these walks, I am acutely aware of my surroundings, which makes me aware that what we call Earth is a predatory world. That is its nature. I have been brought to tears from just looking at a frog or a chipmunk. No apparent reason. It was just my imagination. Nothing was happening. I just saw him sitting there on the road, and I imagine I'd just see a frog or a chipmunk or something, and I would imagine all the struggles and hardships that they must endure just to acquire a few precious nuts or insects. Not to mention that this struggle is a daily struggle that carries on until their demise. That is, until they serve as food for some other creature. And the reason I'm laughing is because looking back now, I see that as all projection. We have no idea what animals experience. It's clearly my projection. Yeah, like I said, I'm just driving down the road and see a chipmunk, and my mind just goes crazy. Like, oh, that poor guy, man. He's got to get food tonight. It's going to be wet. Maybe he's got kids he hasn't seen in a while. Who knows? Anyway, whatever. All right, so not too long ago, I saw a few particular atrocities accompanied with blood-curdling screams in the whole 9 yards. I surveyed our little sliver of property, and I contemplated just how many horror stories are taking place right now on this tiny 7-acre slice of earth. I imagined how many insects are being chased down by other insects, and how many little critters are wide-eyed with fear as they're cornered by some other hungry beast. I contemplated on how this is going on so many levels, repeating itself infinitely through time and space, as long as there is a piece of green grass or brown earth. All the defenseless little creatures that have to watch their mothers being savagely ripped apart by a hungrier beast. As I imagined this scene, I saw this image of a huge body. Let's call it Mother Earth. Or what the Hindus say, Kali. I think Kali is the word for that. And this body consisted of an infinite fluid, aggregated system where all of its parts are just banging up and moving throughout itself, ever creating and destroying infinite aggregates and other aggregates. That is the nature of the world. There's no denying that. Is it sad? Yes. Is it good? Yes. Is it natural? How could it be any other way? After I contemplated all the pain that I imagined to be taking place all over the world, I just sat with it. And this is what I suggest to you. Sit with all the pain that you're imagining. And I'm not suggesting you rationalize it or justify it in any way, but instead just be the space for all that pain. I guarantee you that if you just sit there with a one-pointed attention, then all that pain will automatically transform into a tremendous joy. It will take incredible courage because the mind will jump up to fix the problem, the imagined problem. But don't follow the mind. Just sit with the pain so completely that nothing exists except for the pain. By simply being the space or the loving capacity for this pain, you will surely discover a spaciousness that was not present while caught up in the whole me belief. And again, there's evolution. This is the joy that I'm speaking of. While being complete with your experience of pain, it will be impossible for you to project an illusory duality because there will be no you to begin with. The very negation of the split mind will bring about such a profound clarity that there will be nothing left to resist what is. You may have heard the Buddha's expression, joyful participation in the sorrows of life. This is not a denial of the pain, but instead becoming the pain. We should be happy for our pain and listen to it and appreciate it instead of just reacting to it in an effort to fix it as if it was a problem, a nuisance. Just remember that the very nature of this world is that we call Earth is to be impermanent. With birth comes death. I'm reminded of when our daughter was born. I cried, it was so sad because I was acutely aware that with her birth certificate, the death certificate was attached to the other side. That's the reality. That's the nature of the game, and nothing, including our beloved Earth, is exempt from the truth of impermanence. That is why mystics encourage you to look for and pay attention to the one and only constant. The constant that I refer to is simply that awareness which is taking place in all of these various forms, such as our Mother Earth. All of our dreams are being created on sand, and if we are truthful with ourselves about that, then we can celebrate life instead of resisting it. We can embrace the impermanence, embrace the preciousness of the transitory nature. You may find this analogy helpful. Imagine being offered entry into a landscape where all of your desires are fulfilled. You get everything you want, from love to material possessions. The one caveat of this deal is that everything that you acquire, you will surely lose without exception. Your parents will be stripped from you. Your wife will be stripped from you. Your daughter will be stripped from you. Your kitty will be stripped from you. Your house, your treasured art collection, your music, even your memories are guaranteed to vanish as if they've never existed. Does this sound familiar? To consider life to be anything other than this is nothing short of blatant denial. And with that we end joyful participation in the sorrows of life. So enjoy, thank you very much, and see you next week with chapter 4. Bye-bye.